for heaven's sakes, they're not even accepted sometimes by their own parents. So
it's not true that kids commit suicide if you don't let them transition. I know that's a popular narrative out there, but
I didn't
it's not
say
true.
that.
But with gender identity, there's a flaw in this bill right from the get-go. It says in the preamble that it's a myth that gender identity ever changes. But trans activists themselves will tell you that gender identity is fluid. They'll say that you can be a boy one day, a girl the next. You can be both, you can be neither. And we have all these kids now getting into their 20s who transitioned as teens, and they're now detransitioning. But all this medical harm has been done to them. And so if gender identity was truly immutable and never changed, how do we explain this huge wave of detransitioners that are coming?
Yanky Pollak here reporting for Rebel News at the anti-Bill C6 rally in Montreal with Billboard Chris is in town. He's speaking to people and telling them why he's opposed to Bill C6, and about 20, 30 other people showed up, and a few other groups that oppose Bill C6. Bill C6 is the Liberals' new criminalization of conversion therapy. Parents groups and religious groups across the spectrum, from Catholics to evangelicals, say the law is so vague that it could criminalize mainstream Christian religious teachings, as well as result in criminal charges to parents who seek out gender-affirming therapies for their children who experience gender dysphoria or confusion. Campaign Life calls it an assault on freedom, civil liberties, and Christianity itself. Let's speak with some of the people and see if some people with opposing views or pro views want to speak to us and see what they have to say.
But we can't switch our sex. That's just the nature of life.
So you're back in Montreal.
I'm back.
Where you've been assaulted just a couple of months ago. How do you feel being back here in the city?
I feel great. I've got a lot of support this time. I wasn't going to let these gender terrorists intimidate me and stop me from coming back. So I'm super happy to be back here. I'm going to keep coming every 3 months or so, because we have a giant issue affecting children all across this country, where thousands of kids are being given what's called gender-affirming care, which is a really nice sounding term for pharmaceutical intervention when they don't feel right in their bodies. We have children with a condition known as rapid onset gender dysphoria, primarily affecting girls these days, where they want to transition to boys. And instead of doing any talk therapy to get at the source of this dysphoria, they are fast-tracked and given a drug called Lupron, which completely stops their body from going through puberty. So all of these very important biological processes won't occur. And then they're put on the opposite sex's hormones. So for girls, this is testosterone. For boys, it's estrogen. And oftentimes these girls, when they're 14, 15, 16 years of age, are also getting double mastectomies, even without parental approval, because unethical doctors will do this as a mature minor for these kids. And we're sterilizing a generation of gender-confused kids. And we need to put a stop to it, because all of our studies show that about 90% of these kids, if they were allowed to go through puberty, their gender dysphoria would simply go away and they'd live healthy lives. But instead, we're turning them into lifelong medical patients and destroying their future sexual function, ability to have children, ability to breastfeed, all sorts of medical consequences. So I'm just here to tell the truth and to raise awareness, because the media won't report on it, the government's pushing it, and the schools are now teaching our children that their gender is entirely dependent upon what stereotypes they like. If a girl is more stereotypically masculine, if she's a tomboy, if she wants to be a mechanic or have short hair or wear jeans, or is just simply unhappy with her body, there's a whole bunch of girls that are now trying to transition to boys. And there's a social contagion going on. We have entire peer groups of girls transitioning, and we need to put a stop to this madness.
Doctors are being silenced about giving medical treatments. Please go to stopmedicalsilencing.com and sign our petition.
Because the vast majority of these kids, their dysphoria is going to go away. The flood of hormones that come naturally with puberty help to align people with their natal sex.
I see your point. That being said, for heaven's sakes, let's look at, say, gay boys and gay girls. I mean, it's bad enough that they're not accepted in many ways by many people, okay? Yet they're on sometimes on the brink of suicide, because, for heaven's sakes, they're not even accepted sometimes by their own parents. So
it's not true that kids commit suicide if you don't let them transition. I know that's a popular narrative out there, but
I didn't say that. But You know, for a child to talk about suicide, for me, that's a red flag. I mean, for anybody to talk about suicide is a red flag.
Right.
I don't care if you're 14 or 82,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
So all that being said,
A
as
lot
we
of
know,
a lot of evidence shows that suicidality goes up if you let children transition. So that's just not a good reason for
so what do you say?
medicating
Call
kids
their
straight
bluff?
away.
Is that what you're saying? And,
No, it's not about a bluff, and most kids don't say that on their own. A lot of kids get coached to say that.
Oh, I see.
We've got a doctor back in BC,
They're
a psychologist.
brainwashed. Okay.
Well, we've got a psychologist back in BC. His name. He's on camera saying that he's transitioning over 1,000 kids, including 500 in the foster system. The majority of those are Indigenous. 52% of all the kids in Canada in the foster system are Indigenous. But he's on camera coaching these kids to say, if you're not getting the meds you want right away, I have a solution. Pull a stunt. Say that you're suicidal. It works every time.
Right.
And we've got people on social media also grooming these kids and coaching these kids on what to do in order to essentially scare people into giving them these medications. But when 9 out of 10 of these kids are going to see their dysphoria desist, the first option for them shouldn't be experimental drugs, which have never had a single clinical trial for the purpose they're being used. Bill C6 is another thing we're out here talking about. There's numerous issues, but mainly my issue is about protecting kids from harm, because children cannot consent to all this physical harm that's coming to them. The drugs that they're being given are being done on an experimental basis. They've never been used for this purpose. The drug they're given was originally intended to treat prostate cancer and endometriosis in women. But what it does is it stops the pituitary gland from releasing the hormones which trigger their sex development. So it's all experimental. And we have other jurisdictions around the world that are now ending this practice. The High Court in the UK in December declared exactly what my sign says, which is children cannot give informed consent to these puberty blocking drugs. The main hospital in Sweden that dished these things out also just stopped the practice. Finland's also gone away from doing these things. But in Canada, we're going 100 miles an hour in the wrong direction. And it's going to get worse because we have this bill called Bill C6, which is about to become a law if the Liberals can punch it through this month. And they're trying very hard. But what this bill is about banning conversion therapy. And so on the surface, it looks like a good thing. But there's two components to this bill. It's going to ban conversion therapy based on someone's sexual orientation. And pretty much everyone agrees with that. Sexual orientation is immutable, and we shouldn't be trying to change people who are gay or lesbian to heterosexual. But there's this other component of this bill which has to do with gender identity. Totally different issue. They try to conflate the two, and it's all very strategic because they know no one wants to speak out against trying to convert someone's sexual orientation because that's a horrid practice. But with gender identity, there's a flaw in this bill right from the get-go. It says in the preamble that it's a myth that gender identity ever changes. But trans activists themselves will tell you that gender identity is fluid. They'll say that you can be a boy one day, a girl the next. You can be both, you can be neither. And we have all these kids now getting into their 20s who transitioned as teens, and they're now detransitioning. But all this medical harm has been done to them. And so if gender identity was truly immutable and never changed, how do we explain this huge wave of detransitioners that are coming? Just in one Reddit group alone, there's over 20,000 young adults who are now detransitioning. And this is just going to get bigger and bigger. But this bill is going to make it a criminal offense punishable by 5 years in prison if even a professional therapist, a PhD, a counselor, is deemed to be trying to convert the gender identity of a child. They can't actually define what that means in the bill. They can't define what gender identity conversion therapy is. But in practice, what's going to happen is all the therapists who have practices treating these children, they're going to stop. Because it's simply a matter of time until some extremist comes for their practice and says that they're trying to convert their kid. And these therapists will end up in court having to defend their practice, spending up to 5 years in prison, watching their reputation get dragged through the mud. And we've already seen this happen in California, where they already passed this same sort of bill, and in Australia. And it's put a whole chill on the counseling profession. So then where will these kids go if they can't get talk therapy? They'll end up in the gender clinics at these children's hospitals, where the only option is what's called gender affirming care, or affirmation only. The psychologists, the social workers, the endocrinologists, they don't ask any questions of these children to determine the source of their dysphoria. They simply medicate them straight away with this experimental drug called Lupron, which is a very harsh drug. Women with endometriosis can only go on it for a period of not longer than 6 months, but we'll give this to kids for the entire duration of their puberty. And then they go on to cross-sex hormones and surgeries. And it's sterilizing children. and we're not allowed to say the truth. So I'm out here just having one conversation at a time, trying to spread awareness, because it's my belief that eventually enough people will understand what's going on and we can put a stop to this barbaric practice.
Nos enfants sont inscrits en ce moment dans le système scolaire québécois.
J.K. Rowling was brilliant, and she was really brave too, because you know all the backlash. And well, she's been a lot of people said, well, she's a rich woman, she's privileged. Well, it's because she's rich that she could do it, because a lot of women actually lost their job. My friend Valérie over there, she lost her job for defending women's right to speak about their reality and to be respected in their boundaries. So most of people can't afford losing their jobs. They don't have billions of dollars. So you just can't cancel J.K. Rowling. It's impossible. But probably anybody else would have got cancelled if she had stated what she stated. So thanks to her.
Because what we're seeing today isn't traditional gender dysphoria. If you look up the definition of gender dysphoria, it starts really young, when these kids are 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. It's usually always boys, and it persists into adolescence. What we're seeing today is not the case at all. It's what Lisa Littman, a doctor, coined rapid onset gender dysphoria. And it's girls that just grew up normal girly girls, playing princess, wearing dresses, whatever, and then they get into high school, where it's a little crazy these days, and every kid's testing out some different identity. And who knows what the reasons are, but a lot of these girls, and a lot of it is social contagion, they're wanting to transition to be boys. And they're being taught that it's just an option to be a girl or a boy, and that puberty is just an option. And if you teach kids that their sex is just optional, they're going to believe you,
or coach
because
them,
they're kids.
or coach them.
Yeah.
Or maybe even brainwash.
Kids believe what teachers tell them.
Being out there cost us money. I had to get a personal bodyguard to make sure that I'm safe here. With the recent events in Montreal towards rebel staff, that's the only way for us to stay safe. So if you could help us out, go to journalistdefensefund.com and help us out over there.